Hello and welcome to the Faith Under Fire podcast from ACN Ireland. I'm Brandon Scott and I'm involved in promotions, communications and advocacy with ACN Ireland.
And I'm Michael Kelly. I'm the Director of Public Affairs with ACN Ireland.
This is the first podcast we've made in quite a while now, and we thought that it would be helpful to revive it to give people a better sense of the general state of religious freedom for Christians around the world, and of course the projects that we're also at the centre of and what we're trying to deliver for Christians in some of the most horrific environments. Also, we've noticed as well there is a noticeable dearth of discourse coming from Ireland on this topic, so of course we want to naturally fill that gap and give some much needed attention to this often forgotten but very relevant issue. So today we're going to touch on a very pressing and timely issue, and that's the Christians in the Holy Land. And Michael, I know for yourself, it's a very intimate issue because you yourself have gone on many pilgrimages to the Holy Land. And if you'd like to inform people or remind people, how many times have you gone to the Holy Land as of now?
So I think, Brandon, I've probably been to the Holy Land about 30 times, and that includes a period of about 6 months a few years ago while I was living there when I was completing my book about the Holy Land, an Irish Pilgrim Guide to the Holy Land. I have to get the plug in there for the book.
Excellent. So you're well experienced, you have a lot of expertise, and you amazingly know a lot of people there as well. You've made so many connections with the local Christian businesses and the owners of these businesses as well. And when you went over there 2 weeks ago, it was your first time since the outbreak of war. So first time in just over 2 years. When you were over there, I suppose, did you notice any difference in maybe the attitudes of the Christians in the Holy Land, or even just commercially? How are they faring commercially, Michael?
I'm glad, Brandon, you mentioned the people because, I first went to the Holy Land when I was 18 years old, and I completely fell in love with the place. I felt completely intoxicated. I mean, the city of Jerusalem, the city of Bethlehem, the city of Nazareth, all of these places that I'd read about since I was a little boy, just to visit these places and to be able to walk in the footsteps of Jesus. But you know what really was a revelation to me was the fact that the Holy Land today is still home to a vibrant but small Christian community. These are the people who are the descendants of the first people to hear the message of Jesus, who have kept that faith alive for 2,000 years in very, very difficult circumstances. Often the Holy Land hasn't been an easy place to live. It's not an easy place to live at the moment, and the Christian community has been dwindling. So I would say, how are the people? Well, I spent a lot of time in the West Bank. I spent a lot of time in East Jerusalem. That's home to a lot of the Palestinian Arab Christians. I would say the people are downhearted for sure. 2 years of war has wearied them. They're very conscious that their cousins, their fellow Palestinians in Gaza have suffered immensely, a tremendous loss of life there in the war that followed the Hamas attacks. But the economic conditions in the West Bank have been dreadful. 85% of people in Bethlehem, for example, they work in some kind of job in relation to pilgrims. Well, there haven't been pilgrims in over 2 years. I would say people are cautiously optimistic about the ceasefire. When you live in the Holy Land, you live with the constant mood music of tension in the background. So no one imagines that the peace process is going to magically happen overnight, or that there's going to be a two-state solution overnight. But I would say people are now hopeful with this current fragile ceasefire, and they're really, really hopeful that pilgrims and visitors will start to come back soon, because that's a real lifeline for the Christians of the Holy Land. Not only economically, because of course, Christian hotels, Christian guest houses, souvenir shops, but also it's so important for the Christians to see other Christians from all over the world coming and being with them, being in solidarity and sharing their faith with them as well.
And Michael, just touching on the faith aspect as well, have you seen, just from your experience there a few weeks ago, has their faith waned in any way? Are they still kind of resolute, or can you see that it's getting very difficult for them, and hope is not coming to the fore anymore?
It's certainly getting very difficult, but hope is very much to the fore. I mean, the Palestinian Christians, the Christians of the Holy Land, are people of immense hope. These are people who have staked their entire lives on hope, the hope that doesn't disappoint. I mean, their faith is very, very profound. Their faith is very, very deep. They will speak lots about the suffering. They'll speak lots about the difficulties that the conflict causes, the difficulties in remaining in an often hostile culture. Remember, Brandon, Christians now make up fewer than 2% of the population of the Holy Land. I mean, they're a really, really small percentage all across that ancient land, but they remain hopeful. I would say hopeful rather than optimistic. I think because hope is a deeper virtue than optimism. I mean, it's easy to be optimistic that perhaps it won't rain tomorrow, but hope is something that is built on a surer foundation. So I would say that I find the people, their faith is very, very strong. If your faith wasn't very strong, you couldn't stay in a land like that. You couldn't stay. And I think because it is the land of salvation, it is the land where the Lord was born, where the Lord walked, where the Lord taught, and ultimately where the Lord died and rose again from the dead. I would say their faith is very much nourished by that sense of resurrection, that sense that Easter Sunday always comes after Good Friday, that death, that suffering, that violence, that sin, all of these things don't have the last word, that God has the last word.
And you mentioned, I suppose, and it is a very relevant topic, just how there has been a decline, a pretty stark decline in the Christian population over a period of about almost 80 years. I think it's very important now, we're talking about small Christian communities, that we reflect on the community in Gaza. People don't know that there's a very small Christian community in Gaza, and still to this day, if you have just general conversations with people, they're actually quite shocked to hear that, wow, there's a church right in the centre of all of this conflict. So for those who don't know about Holy Family Parish, Michael, and the heroic witness of someone like Father Gabriel Romanetti, can you tell us more about him and that parish, and kind of just how still to this day the 600 strong, or I think is it about 600, I think 350, 400 roughly, I think there's 600 Christians in total, but about 350 Catholics, just how they're faring and how they are trying to fend off all of the perils of war.
I'm so pleased you asked me that, Brandon, because, in the midst of so much darkness, in the midst of so much suffering, in the midst of this war, a real beacon of light out of Gaza is Holy Family Parish. You're right about the number of Christians. There are 2 Christian communities there. There's the Catholic parish there at Holy Family, and then very nearby them in Gaza City, in what they call the Christian quarter in Gaza's Old City, is the Orthodox parish there as well. The Christians of the Holy Land are made up mostly of Greek Orthodox, and then largely 2 types of Catholics. You have, Latin Catholics or Western Catholics, the kind that we're most familiar with in Ireland, and then Melkite Catholics or Greek Catholics. Those really are the major denominations in the Holy Land. So you have the Latin Catholics and the Orthodox there. And Holy Family Parish, when the war started in October 7th, the religious sisters are there from Mother Teresa's order. The priests are there from the Incarnate Word. And, at that time, a lot of the foreign aid workers, a lot of the foreign people who worked in Gaza, they were all leaving. They were all going to the border to Egypt. And the people of the parish, they came to say goodbye to the sisters. They came to say goodbye to the priests. And, the priests and the sisters, they said, what are you talking about? We're not going anywhere. God has called us here to this part of the world to live out our lives of faith with you, holy, faithful people here. And if we live with you, we'll die with you. And that was the promise, that was the pledge that they made to the people then. And ever since the war began, the people have been living inside the church. They decided to move from their homes. They decided to come together. They decided that they would have safety there together in the church. So they've been living in the church. They've been eating in the church. They've been sleeping in the church. They really have been entirely living their lives together there in the church. And it's one of the great blessings to work with Aid to the Church in Need, that we have been able to support them there in the church. Aid to the Church in Need, Ireland in particular, have been able to support them with fuel for the generator, and the fuel for the generator has kept the sanitation system going. Thank God the church is built above a well, so they have a natural source of water, but the electricity has kept the sanitation system going, the pumping system going, the electricity so that people can connect their mobile phones, because in a time of war like that, when people are separated from their relatives, from their friends, Christians in other parts of the world, but also other parts of the Gaza Strip. Just that one WhatsApp message, that one brief phone call just to say everything's okay, that becomes a lifeline. And Father Romanelli, his faith is amazing. His faith is extraordinary. If you speak to him on the telephone and you ask him how things are, he says, "Oh, not too bad." And by any stretch of the imagination, there's no way that his day has not been too bad that day. But yet the faith is immense. And what I really take from them as well is there's no sense of vengeance, there's no sense of bitterness, there's no sense of recrimination. They really have a sense of just trying to move forward together and trying to share this holy and sacred land together, which really it's an immense, so they're a tremendous witness, I would say, to the rest of the world.
And it's incredible there, I suppose, you touched on the very material support the church is giving, and the fact that really for a lot of Christians and even some non-Christians in Gaza, Holy Family Parish and the facilities in Holy Family Parish are now being used as a sort of refuge for so many. And people often underestimate kind of the church as a kind of as a pastoral kind of vehicle. It's always from a spiritual dimension. They don't really see it as anything beyond a few prayers here and there. And it's amazing when you highlight there just how influential a role the Catholic Church has in all of this and how invaluable it is for so many. And as I said, we get to see that on a daily basis with ACN, and we're very, very blessed. How important, Michael, is the Catholic Church in Gaza and the Holy Land when it comes to providing that very essential humanitarian aid?
Oh, the church is at the centre of community life. I mean, all community life revolves around the church. That was even true before the conflict in Gaza. Churches in the Holy Land tend to have a campus, really. The school is there. There's a facility there for the elderly quite often. In Holy Family in Gaza, thanks to the assistance that has been able to be provided by the likes of Aid to the Church in Need, the parish has been feeding about 3,000 families every day. So not just the Christians, but also their Muslim friends and neighbours, the people who they share that territory with, that land with. So the church is vitally important in the Holy Land, and not just for the Christians, because I really believe deeply, Brandon, that the church in the Holy Land, Christians in the Holy Land, can actually be like a bridge, if you like, between the communities, between the obviously very large Israeli Jewish community and the large Palestinian, mostly Muslim community. There's a great deal of mistrust between those communities. But the Christians very often get on well with everyone, and that obviously is a feature of our faith in terms of reconciliation. It's what God calls us to be reconciled with all peoples, but it's also a feature of being a tiny minority. Whenever you're fewer than 2% of the population, you really need to fit in with everyone. You really need to try to get on with everyone. So, I really hope in the future, as the peace process deepens and talks about peace intensify, I really hope that the Christians can be a very strong part of that in talking about things like compassion, in talking about things like mercy, and talking about things like forgiveness, because my goodness, if there's one thing the Holy Land needs at the moment, it's compassion. And what is compassion? Compassion is to be with one another. Compassion is to bear with one another. Compassion is to forgive one another. Compassion is to try to understand one another, to be in solidarity with one another. And that really is a deep need in the Holy Land at the moment, and I would say a deep desire there as well. People are tired in the Holy Land. Israelis are tired, Palestinians are tired, Jews are tired, Muslims are tired, Christians are tired. I mean, there's a lethargy about the war, and it brings so much psychological suffering along, of course, with the immense loss of life, and of course the destruction of community relations. And that's why war and violence are so diabolical, really, because they destroy the good relations that are necessary for the flourishing of society.
No, wholeheartedly agree there. I suppose let's turn the focus away then from that region of the world and focus more on ourselves. Let's have a bit of an introspective view, which is always dangerous. But in terms of, we need to come up with solutions here in the West, and there's no point in kind of shouting from the sidelines. And you need to do something that's material, that's meaningful. Father Gabriel Romanelli recently spoke out. He said that yes, there has been a ceasefire. Yes, it's been much cherished and much hailed, but he says it doesn't justify the West's kind of absence of commentary on the matter over the last few months. He says, look, the ceasefire is here, it's in place, it's fantastic, but they're still facing dire realities every day in Gaza. Famine is still very much prevalent. Sanitation is awful. There's just a lot of upheaval still, a lot of turmoil in those communities. Do you think, Michael, that in the West we're speaking out, I suppose, adequately, coming from a Christian perspective? Do you think we're highlighting kind of the fact that there are Christians here that are caught in the centre of all of this as well? It's not just a specific community or a specific demographic. It's actually very multifaceted. Do you think the Christian element gets enough kind of traction in the media?
The short answer is no. People get fatigued around things, and exactly what Father Romanelli are saying there. There's like a caravan, and people move on to the next thing. Something else interests them instead. We see this in the war in Ukraine as well, which is where Aid to the Church and Need are doing a lot of work there as well. But I think there are various reasons. People look at the conflict in the Holy Land and they simply see this as a conflict between Jews and Muslims. They say, the Israelis are all Jews, the Palestinians are all Muslims, so this is a conflict among Jews and Muslims, and they don't see the Christian element to it at all, which is really strange, because we live at a time in the West when there's a heightened sense of awareness about, the needs to protect minorities. There's a heightened sense of awareness about historically marginalized communities and the importance for them to be at the center of our human rights concern. And yet when it comes to the fact, that 1 in 7 Christians throughout the world live in places where they're not guaranteed religious freedom, then that's something that is not considered. When it comes to the fact that 1 in 10 Christians live in parts of the world where they're daily under threat of losing their life because of their Christian faith, that's not something that is considered in the West as well. Perhaps because the church has historically been dominant in the West. I don't know. There is definitely this blind spot in the West, and the wider issue of Christian persecution is just not something that gets the attention that it deserves in the West. Whereas if you talk about the specific treatment of other minorities in conflict, for example, if you speak about the specific challenges facing women in conflict, if you speak about the specific challenges facing people living with a disability in conflict, if you speak about the specific challenges facing gay people in conflict, ears prick up. People are happy to listen to things like that, but there's a bit of a blindness when it comes to the issue of Christian persecution, and that's one of the reasons why Aid to the Church and Aid is really trying to work hard to highlight this, particularly in the West, particularly in a culture that is at least historically Christian, to say you should have some sense of empathy with our brothers and sisters who are suffering for their faith in other parts of the world, even if you can't experience that here.
Exactly, and from what I've seen, just kind of anecdotally, is that there isn't necessarily a willful ignorance there. People just don't understand that there is still a very vibrant Christian population in the Holy Land that just wants to be able to practice their faith in peace, and I think those figures that you mentioned there, from 10% of the overall population in 1948 to 2% now, those are very alarming. And with a conflict like this, that could be expedited even further in the space of a year or two, and I think if
Brandon, that's really the point that nobody wants to talk about. When you speak to the Christians in Bethlehem, there hasn't been a census in Bethlehem in quite a number of years, and the Christians are not particularly interested in a census because they actually don't want to know the cold reality of how the numbers are declining, because they know their friends who have left, they know their neighbours who have left, they know the people who they used to sit beside at Mass on a Sunday morning, they know that those families have left as well. Not one Christian family that I know in Bethlehem does not speak about having a son or a brother or an uncle abroad. There are 4 times more Christians, more Bethlehem Christians in Santiago in Chile than there are actually in Bethlehem itself. If you look at cities like Detroit, Michigan, you've got a huge Christian population there as well. I was really surprised to go to a church in Santiago in Chile a few years ago and hear Sunday Mass in Arabic. And I wondered why Sunday Mass was in Arabic. And it was only when I was speaking to people afterwards I realised they were all from Bethlehem. So there really has been this tremendous exodus from the Holy Land. And it's not something the people there want to talk about a lot, because, they know the reality, and we really run the risk in our lifetime, Brandon, of the Holy Land becoming a museum. Because, what is the Holy Land without Christians? The Holy Land, obviously, are the sites associated with the earthly life of Christ. It's that land hallowed by the fact that Christ walked around it. And those things are really, really important. So the Church of the Nativity, for example, built by the Empress Helena, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, also built by the Empress Helena, where she found the true cross, where she found the tomb of Jesus. These sites are so important, but they're only stone. We speak about the Christians of the Holy Land as the living stones. And without those living stones, the Holy Land becomes a museum. It becomes a place that we can visit and we can say, oh, Jesus was here 2,000 years ago, but it's not a place of faith. So we really have to do everything we can to try to sustain the faith community there. So that's why the support from Aid to the Church in Need is so important there, for the schools, for the parishes, for Bethlehem University, for all of the social outreach of the church there. I mean, there's a beautiful boys' home in Bethlehem, the Bethlehem Boys' Home, and that's run by the Franciscan Friars. And that really is a wonderful place for boys who have been abandoned by their families all over the West Bank for all kinds of reasons. And they live there, and it's a beautiful family, and it's a beautiful community. But, they couldn't do any of that without the support of the likes of the benefactors of Aid to the Church in Need in countries like Ireland, who really do have a very, very generous heart for the people of the Holy Land. But that's so important in keeping them there. I mean, my goodness, Brandon, the people of the Holy Land, the Christians there, they don't have any luxuries based on what Aid to the Church in Need gives them. It really is just material goods for survival.
Yeah, and as I said, it is like a double-edged sword, because once you inform somebody who is previously ignorant of the Christian community in Gaza and the Holy Land, and then they get all excited and they're like, well, this is brilliant, I didn't know this, can we visit them? And you're like, well, they're in constant decline. Then you can see they start to get depressed, they're quite upset with that.
Can I ask you a question, Brandon? You've obviously been to the Holy Land, you've visited the Holy Land. What struck you most about the Christians there?
I suppose just the normality of it all, because I did sense at the time that the atmosphere was very tense. I went, just for context, I went about 7 months before the outbreak of war. And I'm not saying this retrospectively, I did feel a very, very tense atmosphere. I felt what was being preached at the mosques, according to translation, was very, very provocative. Little did I know that this was kind of a weekly ritual. I didn't know that this was kind of the weekly rhetoric. But I said to one of the tour guides, I said, I'm really surprised that this doesn't spill over. I'm really surprised that this doesn't incite some form of violence. And little did I know that 7 or 8 months later, the entire fabric of the region would be completely shattered. But I felt that given all of the dangers, which were, you always felt that there was always an imminent danger because of the tension in the air. They're so normal. They just want to be able to practice their faith. They're very simplistic people. They're very minimalistic people. There's no airs or graces. There's no ostentatious kind of gestures or anything like that. All they want to do is just be able to go to Mass, be able to say a rosary, obviously, every night, and go to Mass on a Sunday, and be able to practice their faith in peace, and make a livelihood, make a living from their faith as well. Because, as Michael touched on earlier there, people don't realise just how reliant the Christians in the Holy Land are when it comes to tourism. And they own a lot of businesses there that sell religious icons and ornaments and all of those sorts of things. And of course, there's been a cessation when it comes to trading. So so they're really reliant on us to come back. And this is why, and fair play to yourself, Michael, you've spearheaded this. ACN Ireland is going to be hosting a pilgrimage to the Holy Land this October on foot of the requests from the Christians in the Holy Land as well. So Michael is delivering that, which is fantastic. So you'll get the opportunity to go and see these sites and also contribute to the Christian economy there as well.
Yeah, I'm delighted you bring up the pilgrimage, Brandon, because, we really hope that people will come back. A lot of the messages from the Christians there really were saying, please come back, it's time to come back. And, if you look at the ACN Ireland Facebook and X and Instagram, you'll see some of those videos that we've uploaded of local Christians. You mentioned the souvenir stores there, and, they make beautiful olive wood products, and the olive wood products, the cribs, rosary beads, other religious objects, those are exclusively made by Christian families. And why are they exclusively made by Christian families? I mean, is there some kind of sectarian cartel that keeps Muslims out of the olive wood business? No. Muslims, by virtue of their own religion, are not allowed to work in anything that creates divine images. So anything, that creates anything religious like that, they're forbidden. It's a haram according to Islam, so it's forbidden for Muslims to be involved in that. So, it's very, very difficult for Christians in the West Bank, because they're such a small minority, to really have anything that's exclusive for themselves. But the olive wood carving, that is something that is exclusively Christian, precisely because Islam does not permit Muslims to be involved in it. And if you've ever seen this stuff, and you've seen this stuff, Brandon, but the cribs, the crucifixes, the rosary beads, it's really, really beautiful stuff, and really beautiful just to imagine that this stuff is made by people who are descendants from the shepherds who 2,000 years ago heard the angelic host proclaim the birth of Christ.
Yeah, they're highly skilled, and we're very fortunate. We get a shipload in almost every year to our office. It's amazing just to see how ornate the decorations are, how dexterous they are as well. I wouldn't have the coordination for any of that. You can see the designs are very intricate, so they're brilliantly crafted.
That's because you've misspent all your youth on TikTok and Facebook and all these social media things when you should have been out carving wood products.
No, it's all of those pool cues. That's why my fingers are like this. But so I suppose just to wrap it up, going over there, and you in fairness to you, it was an extensive trip to the Holy Land there, Michael. You went everywhere. You went to the Israel side, and you went to the Palestinian side. And you put concrete plans in action. We're now going to have this pilgrimage. It's brilliant. But what did the Christians in the Holy Land say to you in terms of prospects and hopes, ambitions for the future? Is there anything kind of that's recurring amongst their hopes that you'd like to highlight here?
Yeah, it's very simple. The recurring theme was, we hope we can stay. Everyone said that in East Jerusalem, in Bethlehem, in Beit Zahur, and the other parts of the West Bank. They said they really hope we can stay. We don't want to leave. This is our home. We're custodians of the holy places. These are people who descendants have lived under the various rulers who have ruled the Holy Land. Going way back to to the Romans, to the Byzantines, to the Mamluks, the Ottomans, the British, the Israelis. The various people, and they've all lived there, and they've always lived in difficult circumstances, and they've lived with difficult mood music. But really, their big hope is that they can stay, and for them to be able to stay, they need like a functioning society. They need tourists to come back. They need pilgrims to come back. And I'm delighted to say as well, Brandon, that on May 16th, Aid to the Church in Ireland will have our annual pilgrimage to Knock. And that's an occasion in which we try to highlight the suffering experienced by so many Christians around the world. And I'm really pleased to say that our good friend, Bishop William Shomali, Bishop Shomali is the Latin bishop, a Catholic bishop in the Holy Land. He's from Beit Zahur, so as he says himself, he says, I'm from the shepherds. Why does he say I'm from the shepherds? Because Beit Zahur is shepherds' fields. That's where the shepherds heard the message of the angel that they should hurry to Bethlehem and greet the Christ child, and he himself is a native of Beit Zahur, and that's why he says, I'm from the shepherds. So he's going to be leading the pilgrimage for us on May 16th at Our Lady's Shrine there in Knock, and celebrating the Mass and sharing with us a lot there of the life of the Christians of the Holy Land. So we're hopeful that that can help build solidarity. But yeah, really the message from the people is, come back and walk amongst us so that we can stay here, so that we can be these living stones, so that we can continue to be the custodians of these holy places, so that we can hand them on to a new generation.
And of course, we welcome everybody to go to that pilgrimage in Knock Shrine on May 16th. We'd love to see you there. It's a day for great celebration. We get to celebrate the kind generosity of our benefactors, but also we get to prioritise the conditions that various Christians around the world are facing, and highlight those in a very meaningful way. So please do join us on May 16th. It's sure to be a wonderful occasion. So that's all we have time for this week. From me, Brandon Scott, and my colleague Michael Kelly. Good man, Michael. Thank you for tuning in and putting our suffering brothers and sisters first for a few minutes of your week. And if you'd like to visit our website, you can do so at acnireland.org. We have a list of all of the various projects we're involved in, including a very important Gaza appeal, a Holy Land appeal for the Christians of the Holy Land as well. So do have a look at that, and please donate if it's possible to do so. So please do join us again every fortnight for a new podcast where we give voice to the voiceless in an effort to create a world where Christianity can truly thrive. Thank you very much.